Hilchos Issurei Biah Perek Achad Asar, the laws of forbidden relationships, chapter 11. Today, the Rambam is going to take everything we learned for the last few days and let us know that most of it is impractical. For the last few days, we're discussing the topic of nida. Nida is a woman who experiences a menstrual flow. By biblical law, even if she only bleeds for 1 day, there's no relations allowed for 7 days. On the other hand, even if she bleeds for all 7 days, right after the 7 days are over, she goes to the mikveh and is permitted to her husband. That's the biblical law of nida. Then there's the biblical law of ziva. A woman sees blood during the irregular time for sighting. If she sees blood for 1 day or 2 days, she only has to wait 1 day, go to the mikveh and she's pure. Shomeret yom keneged yom. But if she sees blood irregularly for 3 days in a row, then she needs to wait before she can go to mikveh for 7 spotless days, 7 clean days with no seeing blood, then goes to mikveh and is permitted to her husband. So nida and ziva are in 2 separate elements of a woman's calendar. And because of this, women have to keep track their entire life, from the first time they saw menstrual blood, what the Rambam called the 7-11 calendar. 7 days of potential nida blood, 11 days of potential ziva blood. The only thing which could interrupt this calendar was leida, was birth. When a woman gives birth to a boy or a girl, there's special laws that apply. The whole cycle is disrupted. For a boy, she gets 7 days of impurity, 33 days of free pass. Purity, it's called dam tohar, even if she's actually bleeding. The blood is pure, she can continue to have relations. And with a girl, it's all doubled. 14 days of impurity, 66 days of pass. After these days are over, any blood that a woman begins to see after that restarts the cycle of 7-11, nida and ziva. That's all the laws that we have until now. The Rambam also introduced the concept of ketem, of a stain, that a stain is treated like blood, and we're going to see how that's also treated nowadays. In other words, in this chapter, we're moving from the biblical law, or the Talmudic law, to the present law. Says the Rambam Halacha Aleph Kolsha Amarnu Benida v'Zava v'Yoldes. Everything we said until now about the nida, the regular menstrual blood, the zava, the woman who experiences irregular blood, and the Yoldes, the woman who gives birth, Hu Din Torah, is all the biblical law. These laws were followed when the great court, the great Sanhedrin, was in place and in session. There were great sages among the Jewish people who knew how to tell apart all the shades of blood. And in any case of doubt, if there was doubt about the sightings, how many sightings had accumulated, or the days, if the calendar got messed up, of nida and ziva, since the Supreme Court was in session, you could simply go to Jerusalem and ask them what needs to be asked. And as a matter of fact, the Torah promises this. One of the promises about the great Supreme Jewish Court is exactly this concept, that they'll be able to resolve any doubts and any arguments. It says, Shenemar, it says about them, Ki yipalim mimcha davar lamishpat. If anything in court laws gets hidden from you, bein dam ledam, bein din ledin, whether it's a question of bloods or a question of judgment, you go up to the place meaning Jerusalem, and the court will resolve it. What does the Torah mean when it says a doubt between blood and blood? Bein dam nida ledam ziva, our bloods, the bloods of menstrual period and the bloods of irregular flow. If there's ever a confusion, the court will resolve it. In those days, Jewish girls were very careful about this concept, and they were able to guard their established patterns, and were constantly counting and aware of the count of their nida and ziva days. This is back in the day. However, as we've seen in the last few chapters, it's a big bother to keep track of the days. Many times it leads to doubt. Because even if, of course it's irregular, but even if it happens that a girl, on the day she's born, experiences a menstrual bleed, that day, the first day on earth, they begin to count the 7-11 calendar of nida and ziva, as we explained, which means that a girl from age 1 or age 0, somebody's got to keep track for her how her 7-11 pattern is working. By the way, parenthetically, because a girl can become nida on the day she's born, the minimum that a girl can become impure as ziva is 10 days old. As we said, because assuming the earliest possible case, if the girl sees blood the day she's born for the first time, nida goes for automatically 7 days, as we said, even if you bleed for 1 day. And then to become a proper zava, you have to bleed for 3 days irregularly and consecutively. 3 days right after the 7 days of nida, for a total of 10 days. So the earliest that a girl can become a zava is at 10 days old. At any rate, that's pretty early in life. Hine lamadata, behold, you learn, shemitchilas ri'iyah, mascheles limneis yemei nida, v'imei ziva kol yameha. From the beginning, the very first sighting she ever has in her life, she needs to count and keep track of the 7 days of nida and the 11 days of ziva, all her days. Va'afilu ra'asa v'hi ketana, even if she saw the first time blood while she was a minor. Because of this, says the Rambam Malacha Gimel, ubimei chachmei Gemara, in the days of the Talmudic sages, nistapek hadavar harbe b'ri'iyah sadamim. There became many doubts in the sightings of blood, v'niskalkalu havsases, and all the established patterns became confused. Not every woman had the strength, limneis yemei nida v'imei ziva, to count and keep track of her personal calendar of nida and ziva days. Lefichach, therefore, initially, hechmiru chachamim b'davar zeh. The sages imposed a stringency. The gazru, and they decreed, shayehu kol yemei ha'isha kimei zivasa. A woman should always treat her days like ziva days, like the irregular days. V'yiyah kol dam shatira, sfeik dam zivus. Every blood she sees is a potential ziva blood. Now, as the commentaries explain, it's not swinging the pendulum completely one way, because if you go only to ziva, you end up with a kula, with a leniency, in which for 1 or 2 days of bleeding, you only compensate with 1 day. Whereas in the nida days, even seeing blood for 1 day forced you for 7 days to separate from your husband. So the commentaries explain the idea is she should consider every blood to potentially turn into ziva if she bleeds for 3 days straight. Of course, if she bleeds just for 1 day, she should still keep 7 days away from the husband as though she were a nida. But nevertheless, keep it in mind as though it were ziva, such that if she bleeds for 3 days straight, she has to count 7 spotless days like a zava before she can be with her husband again. Now, that's all the time that Rambam dedicates to this stringency, because it was only in existence for a very short time, in the Talmudic era. Then the Rambam says, Halacha Daled, v'oid hechmiru b'nei Yisrael al atzman. Furthermore, Jewish girls took upon themselves a stringency, chumra yeseira al zeh, even more of a stringency than this. V'nohagu kulam, b'chol makayim, because according to the previous stringency, you still need 3 days of sighting blood to create a zava status and require 7 spotless days. Here, the Jewish girls said, and this is an accepted custom even till today, b'chol makayim sheyesh Yisrael, any place where there are Jews, shekol bas Yisrael sherayadam, that any Jewish girl that experiences a sighting of blood, afilu leira asar latipa kechardol bilvad upasa kadam, even if she only sights a blood size the size of a mustard seed, that's it, and the blood stops, seferes lashiva yamim nikim. She goes into a state of being a full zava and only resumes relations with her husband after counting 7 spotless days. Even if she saw it during her nida time, in other words, she knows it's her monthly period. She knows it's her monthly cycle, and it should for sure be considered nida. No. For 1 day, for 2 days, for 7 days or more. When the blood stops, she counts 7 spotless days like a major zava. She goes to the mikvah on the night following the 7th day, the night of the 8th. Afal pisha he's fake zava, even though we're giving her the doubt of being a zava, and a zava can go to the mikvah by day. Nevertheless, the women treated themselves in this way in one standard fashion, like a nida, go to the mikvah only at night. So they adopted the stringencies of both. 7 spotless days and only going to mikvah after the 7 days. Maximum, if there's a pressuring circumstance, she can go on the 8th day. Even though you only go by night, she can go on the 8th day. If there's a case of, they lock the city gates at night, it's too cold, or whatever it is. And afterwards, she'll be permitted to her husband. So that's the bottom line. They eliminated the whole 7-11 calendar. You see blood, you're considered a zava, count 7 spotless days, and that's it. By the way, nowadays, we have even more, and the Rambam will mention this soon, which is that we don't just start counting the 7 spotless days after the blood stops. We start counting 7 days after we're certain that the blood stopped, which is after 5 days from the beginning of the period. Woman gets her period, she must wait a minimum of 5 days, then she can do an internal inspection to see if the bleeding has stopped, and if it has, then she begins the spotless days. So you basically end up with a minimum of 12 days of separation. But we'll get to that more in a minute. So when it comes to nida and ziva, this is the current custom. No 7-11, just consider yourself to be a zava. What about birthing women? That law also changed. Says the Rambam, "V'chein kol hayoldas b'zman hazeh," so too, anybody who gives birth in these times, harehi ki yoldas b'zoif, we consider her to have given birth in a ziva state, which means that she needs 7 spotless days. As we explained, she needs to have 7 spotless days before she can go to mikveh and be with her husband again. In addition to that, most of the sages, says the Rambam, eliminated the concept of the purity days. These days of free-for-all, the pass, they canceled that. Uminhag pashut, it's an accepted custom. B'shinaru be'eretz hasvi u'v'sfardu v'mayrev. In Babylonia, look at the map over here. Shinar is Iraq, Babylonia. Eretz Hatzvi is the name for Israel, that's over here. Sfarad is Spain, of course that's up here. And Mayrav, the west, they say in the commentaries it refers to North Africa. So Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, where Jews used to live very much. So this was the accepted custom over here. What was the custom? That if a woman sees blood during the days that are typically allotted for what's called milot, the free pass days after birth. If she sees blood then, even if she already counted 7 spotless days, she went to the mikvah, she should be totally pure. She must count again 7 spotless days after the blood stops. We don't give any leniency of the purity blood. Any blood which a woman cites, labor blood, the blood that's usually considered pure blood after birth, everything is impure. She must count 7 clean days after the blood stops. Now the Rambam says you should know, this law is not a Talmudic law. This was made after the Talmud was concluded, in the days of the Geonim. They were the ones that made the decree of not having any pure blood. In other words, what we said before about the Jewish girls accepting upon themselves that every blood should be treated like zava was only outside of the birth context. What the Jewish girls took upon themselves as a stringency in the days of the Talmud was only spoken about blood that's usually considered to be impure, menstrual blood, irregular flow of blood. They said all those bloods were going to wait for 7 days. But in the days of the Talmud, blood that you would see during the days of purity after properly counting 7 days, they weren't worried about that. Because the days of purity cannot turn a woman into anything biblically, into not a nida or a zava. Whatever she bleeds, even while she's bleeding, relations are permitted, technically. Later on came the Go'anim and said, we're deleting this whole green box. All these green boxes are out, women don't have any days of purity. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, because it's a custom which came about after the Talmud, so we know that Rambam said in his introduction, way back when we started the first book, that any laws that are in the Talmud have to be universally followed. But laws that were enacted after the Talmud, once the Jews spread out into their exile, every community gets to review it and decide if they want. Therefore, the Rambam says, V'shamanu, we've heard, Shebetzarfas, that in France, Bayalim al dam toyhar kedina gemara adayim. They never took upon themselves this stringency. They do allow women to have the free pass days after birth. Here's Tzarfat, over here is France. Most Jews were living over here. Some Jews spread out to higher up in Europe. They were already considered Ashkenaz. This was not the Sephardi community over here. And they were following a different custom where they were allowed to have relations in the days of purity. Achar Sfira Tvila Mitumas Yoldas Bezev, of course, after counting 7 clean days after the birth, because they considered every birthing woman to give birth in a Ziva state, so at least that, initially 7 clean days, but after that, you have the free for all days. The Davar Zeh, Talib B'Minhag, says the Rambam, this concept is dependent on custom. Now today in Shulchan Aruch we say that everybody is already, it's universally accepted, that we don't do this. There is no such thing as days of purity today for women who give birth. Halacha Ches, another thing which changed from the Talmudic era to now. V'chein din dam besulim bezman hazeh. Hymenal blood, the virgin blood, in nowadays. It used to be that you got a little more license. If it's the woman's first time, then she got like either 4 nights, as we saw in the earlier chapters, depending on her age, different amounts of nights off, so to speak. That even if she's bleeding, because it's not menstrual blood, it's allowed. But today, says the Rambam, even if she's a minor, it isn't even her time to experience menstrual blood. Or she never did. A groom is only allowed to have relations once, what's called bi'ilat mitzvah, the mitzvah relations, and then he withdraws and separates from her. Whatever blood she experiences, even if it's hymenal blood, puts them out of commission for 7 days. As long as she's citing blood because of the wound, because of the rupture, she's still impure. After the blood stops, then she counts 7 clean days, and then is permitted to her husband. It's pretty hard, but that's what happens today. Groom and a bride just get married. to make them busy, right? Women are about to just get married, they have relations once, and that's it. They're out for at least 12 days, especially nowadays when you wait 5 days at least, and then you count 7 clean days. So it could be a lot. Yesar al zeh, says the Rambam, more so, and this also applies today. Kol bas shetavua lihinasei v'ratzasa. Any girl who was asked to marry, in other words, the husband made what they call today, popped the question, right? You want to get married, and she agrees. She must wait 7 clean days after she agrees. And only then can she have relations. Maybe out of her arousal, her desire to be married, she experienced the menstrual flow and she didn't feel it. And because of that, we're worried she may have bled and she has to go to the mikveh. Whether she's an adult or a child, she must count 7 clean days after she desires to marry, then go to the mikveh and have relations. That's why today one of the reasons why today women have to go to the mikveh before they get married. First of all, because they're a nida and they never went to the mikveh ever. But even if they had, they would still have to go again because of what's called dam chimud, this blood of arousal. Halacha Yud, says the Rambam, he reminds us, all this, while it's an extra stringency, it's a custom that Jewish girls have been keeping from the days of the sages of the Talmud. So never should we remove ourselves from this. Therefore, any woman who agrees, when she's asked to get married, she cannot get married till she makes the count of 7 clean days and goes to the mikveh. If she's getting married to a Torah sage, technically, she can get married right away. And she'll count the days after they get married and then go to the mikveh. Because the Torah sage knows that she's forbidden on account of the chimud, on account of the arousal, and he'll be careful, and won't come close to her till she goes to the mikveh, and therefore technically they can get married right away. Today, we don't do this. Everybody, no matter what kind of Torah sage you are, there's at least the woman has to go through the process of counting 7 clean days before the marriage, go to the mikveh, and then the marriage can be consummated. Halacha Yud Aleph, din haksamim bizman hazeh, the laws of stains that we talked about in chapter 9. Nowadays, k'moshe beyarnu is exactly as we explained it. Ve'ein badavar chidush v'lo minhag. Nothing new and no new customs have been added. Ela kol kesem she'amarnu shehi tahira, harei tahira. Any stain about which we said she's pure nowadays too. V'chol kesem she'amarnu tmeya, whatever stain we've said is impure. So then, im ein bakesem shir kedei lachush lezivus, or some have afilu, whatever it is. The point is, even if there's not an amount on the stain which would allow us to suspect that she's a zava, soiferes shivas yamim miyom shenimtza bayakesem. She counts 7 days from the day she found the stain. If the stain was big enough, in which we couldn't think that maybe she bled for 3 days straight, and she is a zava, she counts 7 days starting after the day that the stain was found. In other words, if it's not big enough, she counts this day of finding as day 1, 6 more clean days afterwards. If she finds a stain that's big enough to make her into a zava, she only begins a 7-day count the next day. Either way, you don't have to wait as long for when you see regular blood, because one who sees blood is not like one who sees a stain. Any case we said yesterday, where a woman who gives birth, his mother is considered to be pure, she will be pure nowadays as well. Yesterday we discussed different cases of miscarriage, which Torah doesn't treat as a birth at all. Those cases would be ruled the same today. Also a woman who discharges something white, or something yellowish or greenish tinge. Or she discharged a red mass that has no blood. The Rambam rules that she is pure even nowadays. The sages only enacted a stringency with impure blood. This is not impure blood. Nevertheless, in Shulchan Aruch, we don't rule like this. We say it's impossible to differentiate between different births. Whenever a woman discharges in the context of what should be birth, she is considered to be impure like a birthing woman. But the Rambam rules that she's pure. Halacha Yud Gimel, v'cheinim haisa ba'maka, v'haya hadam sheisis mimena, oisha hadam mimei raglayim. Similarly, if a woman had a wound inside her uterus and there was bleeding because of it, or she was bleeding together with her urine, harezet tahira, she's still pure, like it used to be in the Talmudic times. And again, Shulchan Aruch here argues and rules more stringently, but the Rambam rules more leniently. V'lo nischadish davar. Nothing, bottom line, nothing was added. No novel things were added except the fact that a woman has to count 7 clean days in any case where she cites blood that would usually render her impure. Also, they said that all shades of blood are impure. The other day we learned that there's different shades, black and red and different things. Today, if it looks like blood, we're going to consider it blood. And of course, even in that, there's still some differences. That's why we bring cloths to the rabbi to check, and he'll determine if it's actually considered blood. Halacha Yud Dalet. The Rambam addressed every element of Jewish law, and when it came to dealing with local custom or newer customs, he had to address erroneous customs, mistaken customs that were adopted in communities that weren't so aware or thought they were more aware than everybody else. The fact that you find in certain places that they would force a woman to keep double. They would say, if she saw blood in her natural menstrual time, keep 7 days like a nida, even if she only saw blood for 1 day. And after 7 days, they make her sit for 7 clean days. Total of 14 days. Ein ze minhag. That's not a custom. It's not even a fit Jewish custom. It's a mistake made by whatever rabbi gave them that ruling. Don't even turn to that. It goes like this. After the woman stops to bleed, that's when she begins the count of 7 days. She sees blood for 1 day, Seferes Achar of Shiva Nikiyim, count 7 clean days afterwards, V'terelos V'lil Shmini, go to the mikvah on night number 8, Shehulil Sheni Shala Achar Nidasa, which would be, the count would start on night number 2 after her nida period began, Umuteres L'bayla, and right away she's permitted to her husband. I said before, today, we kind of follow this with a little bit of adjustment. We say wait 5 days. We don't make her wait the whole 7 days. Typically, after 5 days, the bleeding has stopped on a regular period. And so, after the 5 days, the women do what's called the hefsek tahara. They do an internal inspection to make sure the blood has stopped. And then the 7 clean days begin. But definitely, we don't make them wait the whole 7 days before counting the 7 spotless days. Tesvav. V'chein zesha timtza b'miktzas mekaymis. Also, the fact that you'll find in some places, v'timtza tshuvais l'miktzas ha'ga'onim. You may even come across responsa written by certain ga'onim. They were so strict with birthing women, not only did they take away the days of free pass, but they turned them into prohibited days. They said a woman, after she gives birth to a male, cannot have any relations till the end of 40 days. Woman who gives birth to a female, she has to wait 80 days. Even if she only sees blood during the first 7 days, she counts 7 clean days and she went to the mikvah, but used to say no. Full 40 or 80 days, you're impure. Ein ze minhag, says the Rambam, that's also not a valid custom. It's a mistake in those responsa. It's heretical to follow this custom. They learned this concept from the Sadducees, who only interpreted literal biblical law. They didn't believe in the oral tradition. They came up with this thing. Don't keep it. It's a mitzvah to force them out of their behavior, to remove this idea from their hearts. Bring them back to the ways of our sages, the words of our sages, to count only 7 clean days, and that's it. The Rambam reminds us that while a woman can enter the state of nida or ziva just by seeing blood, she doesn't just exit it by the proper amount of days passing. A woman doesn't leave her state of impurity. She doesn't leave her status of being an erva, biblically prohibited, until she goes to a mikvah, a proper kosher mikvah. And today's women's mikvahs are beautiful. Nothing should be intervening between her flesh and the water, which we're going to explain how those work later. In the laws of mikvahs, at the end of the 10th book of the Rambam, we're going to explain what's a kosher mikvah, what's a disqualified mikvah, the way to go to the mikvah to immerse, the laws of the intervening substances. But it has to be a mikvah. But if she washes in a bathhouse, even if all the waters in the world wash over her, she's after the washing, just like she was before the washing, bekares. Relations with her are punishable by excision. Nothing brings a woman up from the state of impurity to purity, unless she dips in the waters of a mikvah, or in a stream, or the oceans that are like a stream, as will be explained in detail in the laws of the mikvahs. Yud Zayin Kol Shivas Yamim Nikim Shebizman Hazeh, all the 7 days of spotless days that we keep nowadays. Afal Pi Shehein Safek, even though technically they're only being kept out of doubt. Because if she was a nida, she only needs the 7 days initially, without 7 spotless days, and she's good. Nevertheless, im tavla bahen kilu loy tavla. If she went to the mikveh during those days, it's as though she never went to the mikveh. Im tavla bashvi. But if on the 7th day she goes to the mikveh, she's supposed to wait till the night. If she goes by day, afal pisha aser lasis kin lechatchila shemayave livel bashvi achar atvila. Even though initially you shouldn't do that because perhaps she might erroneously have relations on the 7th day after the mikveh, hayil v'tavla bizmana afilu haysa zava vadai. Since technically, even if we knew for certain that she was a zava, she can go to the mikveh on the 7th day, as we explained in the earlier chapters. Harezu also la tvila. So the mikveh that she did on the 7th day counts after the fact. Halacha Yud Ches. The Rambam here in one law introduces a concept that nowadays has full books on it. This is called the concept of harchakot, keeping distance during the time that a woman is forbidden. Besides for the prohibition to have relations, says the Rambam, it's forbidden to cleave, to come close. They say here, embrace your wife during the 7 clean days. Even if she and you are wearing clothing. Shouldn't come close to her. Shouldn't touch her, even with his pinky. Or some say even her pinky. You don't even have the slightest amount of touch. Nor should you eat with her in one plate. This is all that Rambam gives us. There's many, many more details about this. We try to keep as much physical distance as possible during the prohibited time. We don't even pass things from one to another directly. You put it on the table and she picks it up. Klale shel davar, the general rule is, yinhag ima bimei sfira k'mesha yinhag bimei nida. In the days of her counting, the spotless days, the clean days, treat her like she's a nida herself. Because like we explained, she's still punishable by excision until she goes to the mikveh. If you're going to start engaging in touching, that can lead you to places you don't want to go. And therefore, the sages said it's also forbidden to have any physical touch.
What about if it's not your wife? Let's just say you have visitors over and there's a woman.
You shouldn't be touching her for other reasons.
Huh?
You shouldn't be touching her for other reasons.
You a plate
Then it's okay.
She's passing you the
Then
salad.
it's okay. Yeah.
And you don't know it.
That's okay. Only between you and your wife. That's a good question. Yutes. Kol malachis sha'isha oisa lebayla. All tasks that a woman is supposed to perform for her husband, as we learned in the laws of marriage, nida oisa lebayla. A woman who is on her period can also do for her husband, even though they can't technically touch each other, or maybe you could think it could lead to relations. No, doesn't matter. All the things she usually does, she can do chutz, with the exception of harchatzas panav yadav v'raglav, washing his face, hands, and feet. That's touching, obviously. Or mezigas hakois, diluting his cup of wine. It's considered to be an act of fondness. V'hatzas hamita b'fanav, and also making his bed in front of him. Gzeira shemayava lidvar aveira, for a decree, perhaps they're going to come to do an aveira. This is also the reason why they don't eat in one plate. Nor they don't touch each other. Because it could lead to a sin. Also in the 7 clean days, she also shouldn't do those works, those tasks for him. However, it is permitted for a woman to adorn herself with basic makeup, so she shouldn't become unattractive to her husband. Don't go over the top. But regular makeup and adornments is allowed even during the nida days.